The big three during the 1980s were facing lots of new challenges. The answer was to downsize their lineups and transition to front-wheel drive platforms. And so people like to associate 80s cars as former shells of what they once were, depending on who you ask. While these cars aren't land yachts by any stretch of the imagination, I do feel like this list will shock you. And I know that sounds cliche, but there were still some pretty big full-size sedans on the market. With that being said, here are the top 10 longest American cars from the 1980s. If you're watching this and you think I'm some AI robot, I'm not, so stay tuned until the end of the video so you can hear my mistakes and my mispronunciation. There you go. At the number 10 spot, we have the Mercury Grand Marquis coming in at 213.5 inches or 17.8 feet. For a modern reference, the Ford Taurus is about 16.9 feet and the Buick Regal is about 16 feet. Compared to the prior generation Marquis, the length was shortened by about 2 feet. While still downsized, this wasn't necessarily a drastic change as opposed to other models that got hit a lot harder. However, they were almost 1,000 pounds lighter depending on the powertrain. 1979 would mark the beginning of the Panther platform. If you want to talk about one of the best domestic platforms ever made, this has to be one of them. The durability and simplicity accompanied by its body-on-frame construction makes these first-gen Panthers so great. As the 1980s progressed, GM switched over to front-wheel drive platforms, and Chrysler got out of the full-size market even earlier. These Panthers were the only rear-wheel drive sedans with a V8 from the domestic market. Then came GM's giant B-bodies in the 90s, but for some time this was it, and of course the other Panthers from the time as well. I should also mention that this was the last American car with an available carbureted engine to be offered, which was an option for the Marquis up until 1991. This has to be one of my favorite generations for the Grand Marquis. In and out, these cars are absolutely stunning.
When some car manufacturers downsized their cars,
They need shorter clubs.
many people had to redefine
More room.
their standards of luxury. But for those who won't compromise, there's Mercury Grand Marquis. Still full-sized with the largest trunk of any car sold in America. A spacious interior.
At number 9, we have the 1987 to 89 Pontiac Safari at 215.1 inches. Before we start with this entry, I do need to address a few things. All GM B-body sedans were dropped by 1986 except for the Caprice and the Wagon counterparts that were offered until around 1990. So when I said those Panthers were the only rear-wheel drive V8 sedans from the domestic market offered during the late 80s, I was wrong. Speaking of GM's B-bodies, the Impala, the Bonneville, the 88, etc., they're all pretty close in length. Obviously, it's the same platform. With that being said, some models were technically longer than others, and the Pontiac Safari made the cut. One of the pictures I came across shows a side-by-side comparison between the Sunbird Safari, Pontiac's compact wagon of the time, and the Safari. The Safari isn't as big as it once was, but that doesn't mean it was small. These B-body Pontiacs, while they look awesome from a modern perspective, consumers were already phasing out of these full-size wagons and moving to minivans. On top of that, each division apart from Cadillac had a B-body wagon in its lineup, and so it faced divisional competition as well. At number 8, we have the Ford LTD Country Squire at 216 inches or 18 feet. Specifically the 1988 and 89 models due to the mid-cycle refresh that helped gain an extra inch. I haven't made a poll in a while for reasons that I don't know, but I'm going to bring it back for this week's episode. I ask you all, 1989 Pontiac Safari or 1989 LTD Country Squire? The poll will be in the community tab and will be up for 1 week as the release of this video. After a week, I will pin the poll results in the comments section if you missed out. So Ford actually had 3 wagons during the late 80s. The Escort wagon, the Taurus wagon, and the Country Squire. Compared to the others, they look very outdated. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, not at all. It's just funny how these were sold side by side at dealer lots. I'm not a car expert in the slightest. Some of you guys make that very clear. But anyway, I didn't know these had rear seats that faced one another. As a kid, I'm sure lots of memories were made in the back of these, any wagon for that matter, and that's something that my generation won't ever get to experience. Coming in at number 7, we have the Buick Lesabre sedan at 218.4 inches. Compared to the prior generation, they lost only about 2 inches in length. but lost nearly 900 pounds in weight, and so the floaty drive experience you got in those prior Lesabres wasn't nearly the same. That doesn't mean they didn't drive like a boat, I'm just saying it wasn't to the same degree. As for the interior, while there was a reduction in shoulder room and headroom, rear seat legroom increased. I totally understand that these B-bodies were designed in the late 70s, but then again, they were still being sold throughout the 80s. The drastic change wouldn't come until 85-86 when GM transitioned to front-wheel drive platforms. Those Lesabres lost around 21 inches in length. It's a Buick Lesabre. These are very luxurious vehicles that most people couldn't afford back in the day. I do think they look good, but compared to those 4th gens, just not quite as good.
Here is the shape of a 76 full-size Buick Lesabre, and here, the shape of the new 77 Lesabre, resized, trimmer, yet has plenty of seating comfort here, and with over 25% more trunk space.
The Lincoln Continental is the 6th longest American car from the 1980s. Just like the LTD Wagon and Grand Marquis, we are on the Panther platform. The 6th gen Continental is strange because it only lasted one model year. It then was released as the town car in 1981. The Continental nameplate was shifted to the midsize segment for 1982 on Ford's Fox platform. The reason for all this was to basically eliminate confusion and saturation within the Lincoln model line. In terms of length, the 1980 Continental was 219.2 inches, the same as the town car and Mark VI. Compared to the prior generation, specifically for 77 through 79 with its exterior revisions, those were 233 inches, which means almost a 14-inch drop in length. I'll even go the extra mile here and bring in the last and final generation Continental. Those were 201 inches. Compared to those 77 through 79 models, that's more than a 2.5 feet difference. At the time, these Continentals were one of the most advanced vehicles from Ford. 4-speed automatic with overdrive, electronic fuel injection, digital instrument panel, trip commuter, electronic stereo, keyless entry, power everything, completely loaded with options. With that said, these Continentals were also some of the most expensive American cars on the market. At number 5, we have the Dodge St. Regis with a length of 220.2 inches or 18.4 feet. The St. Regis was on Chrysler's R-body platform along with the Newport, New Yorker, and Grand Fury. I have to be honest, I really do like the design of these. They look like that typical sedan from this time, simple and boxy, but unfortunately they didn't sell all too well. Most of these sales numbers came from fleet companies or law enforcement, not the general public. The reason being is these R-bodies were introduced in 1979, pretty much at the peak of the oil crisis. For the first year, around 55,000 units were sold, but come 81, its final year, less than 7,000. Any of these R-bodies are super hard to come by because a lot of them were rode hard and put away wet, along with having such a short production run. For 1982, the Diplomat would take its spot as the largest sedan in the lineup, with a reduction of nearly 16 inches in length. Back to GM's B-body, we have the Buick Estate Wagon at 220.5 inches. A whopping 3/10 of an inch longer than the previous entry, the St. Regis. But this is a top 10 list video, and in this scenario, size does in fact matter. Compared to the prior generation, these wagons lost about 10 inches in length and about 11 inches in overall wheelbase. These Buick Estates were some of the most luxurious wagons offered in the 80s. They came with all the bells and whistles, a smooth, comfortable ride. They were some very nice vehicles. I already talked about the Safari and Electra, which this vehicle is based on. With that said, I don't have much to say. Before I move on to the next entry, I have to be honest, I like the next generation better, the Roadmaster. Usually I don't prefer the newer stuff over the older stuff, but this is a rare case where I do. If this video reaches 5,000 likes, I'll go ahead and make a 90s edition video, and those final gen B-bodies will for sure make the cut. The third longest American car from the 80s goes to the Cadillac Sedan DeVille at 221 inches. This generation ran from 1977 until 1984 and was over 9 inches shorter, 4 inches narrower, and half a ton lighter than the previous generation. These are still some big cars from a modern perspective, which really isn't saying that much. The longest sedan in Cadillac's lineup is the CT5 at 194 inches. That's a 27-inch drop. I would love it if Cadillac brought back some bigger sedans in their lineup, at least just one, but we know that won't ever happen. I think this generation of Seville is rather decent, especially compared to the next, which saw the biggest downsizing in the history of the Seville nameplate. Also, this would be the last generation that the Seville was rear-wheel drive and came with a V8. After this point on, never again.
How do you improve a car that consistently has had the highest repeat ownership of any U.S. luxury car make? How do you improve a Cadillac? The Sedan DeVille, for example. First, you engineer it to make more efficient use of space, give it more rear legroom and headroom, and a Cadillac-sized trunk.
You make it more maneuverable for easier parking. Give it a superb ride. In short, you build the next generation of the luxury car. Cadillac, 1977. At your Cadillac dealers now.
At number 2, we have the Oldsmobile 98 at 221.4 inches, 4/10 of an inch longer than the Seville sedan. For those of you who don't know, these 98s were on the same platform along with the Electra and Fleetwood Brougham. To be clear, the Seville sedan, Electra, and Fleetwood should be numbers 3, 4, and 5, and the 98 at number 2. But I thought that wouldn't be as entertaining of a video because it would mean that there would be no mention of Ford at all, and half the video would be me talking about the same platform. Same story with the St. Regis, Grand Fury, and Newport. They technically should be numbers 8, 9, and 10. I will say though, of all the C bodies, the 98 is the longest somehow, some way compared to the others. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, Oldsmobile is one of my favorite divisions from GM. These 98s, especially the Regency, are such good looking cars and have aged very well. I'm sure some of us spend time on Facebook Marketplace looking for great deals, sometimes a couple hours on a Saturday. Not specifically this generation 98, but the last. I do occasionally see what's out there, as I would love to have one for a little bit, especially the ones with the supercharged 3800. The longest American car from the 80s goes to the Chrysler New Yorker. Same deal with GM's C bodies, the 98 was longer for whatever reason, and the same goes with the New Yorker. A total length of 221.5 inches, which is about 8 inches shorter than the Marquis at the number 10 spot in the 70s video. The only reason why Chrysler made this video is because of these R-body cars that were introduced in 79. They were not on the market for very long, as Chrysler quickly got rid of them in favor of the K cars in 82. Everything in their lineup drastically shrunk, and unlike Ford and GM, they didn't offer any traditional full-size sedans until the 90s with the LH platform. That K platform was a huge success, and it helped them stay afloat, and I guess it wasn't necessary to have a giant sedan anymore. Even Chrysler's limo and executive sedan were not that long. Actually, the limo was shorter by an inch compared to the New Yorker, and it's a limo. Compared to the New Yorker that was released in 83, it lost almost 3 feet in total length, making it the biggest drop out of all the cars in this video. Just like the St. Regis, I do like the look of these, and I like how they retain the hidden headlamps that were so popular in the 70s. Unfortunately, timing was just a bit off, and these were very short-lived. Technically, those 250 and 350 long wheelbase Ram vans were even longer at 229.9 inches, or about an inch and a half longer than the New Yorker, but I didn't want to include any vans or trucks. So there you have it, the longest American cars from the 1980s. Not as big as they once were, but compared to the other options during this time, these models were the closest you could get to a full-size boat. If you made it this far, first, thank you, and second, if you aren't subscribed, consider hitting that button to see more future content. I will say it's been a hair over a year since I returned back to YouTube, and I've seen lots of progress in myself. If you don't believe me, check out my older stuff. They're a little hard to watch, but it shows growth, and I'm very happy where I'm at as of filming this. That's it for this week's video. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will try to see you all next week. Back to GM's B-body, we have the Buick Estate Wagon at 220. These Buick Estates were some of the most luxurious wagons. Come 81, its final year, less than 7,000 compared to the prior generation. Before I move on to the next entry, most of the sales numbers came from fleet companies or law enforcement. At number 5, we have the Dodge. If this